I would like to call to order the budget hearing on May 8th, budget hearing. There it is. I just missed it. Would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, presentation of the budget. Is that Carl?
Thank you, Tracy.
You're welcome.
All right, good evening, folks. Welcome to the budget hearing for the 2023-2024 school year. As part of our agenda today, we're going to revisit our budget goals. Back in February during our first budget workshop or budget presentation, we went over some budgetary goals for this coming budget year, and we're just going to revisit them as we begin this budget hearing. We're going to talk about the future financial outlook. We talked about this a great deal over the first couple budget presentations and the financial outlook, the funding cliff in future years. But I was able to get a very interesting article that we'll talk about in further detail. We're going to look at our proposed budget, our expenditures, which are going to be broken down into three different categories: administrative, program, and capital. And by law, our expenditures are required to be broken down into these three areas. And we're also going to visit our revenue in terms of the funding streams that we're bringing in. We're going to take a look at our tax levy history and just do a quick budget summary and discuss what that means in terms of an impact or an average impact on folks' school tax bills across the 7 different municipalities. We'll revisit our ballot propositions and finally highlight the Board of Education candidates for the 2 seats that are available. So when we started the budget planning for this year, and by the time we reached our first budget workshop or budget presentation in February, these were some of the goals we had up. And we also made sure we went around and did presentations in buildings across the district, our 2 schools, also the transportation, our bus garage, and made sure we elicited feedback from various stakeholders, especially the folks that work in the district, to make sure we weren't missing any priorities as we planned for this budget or educational plan for the 23-24 school year. Part of those budget goals was meeting the needs of students while being responsible to our taxpayers, specifically stabilizing the local tax levy and making it somewhat predictable year over year, and making sure there weren't huge spikes or huge drops year after year that significantly impacted the community. We wanted to protect the availability of long-term district reserves. Over the last 6 years, our use of district reserves has essentially been multiplied by 5. We went from using about $250,000 in reserves to using about $1.149 million last year, and we wanted to hit the reset button on that if possible. We wanted to phase in some of the positions that we've acquired over the last few years through federal funding, considering the federal funds, the last of our federal funds are going to end as of September of 2024 is when the last check needs to be cut for the federal money. So we want to make sure after September of 2024, we're not in a position where we either have to significantly increase our tax levy year over year or look to cut positions thereafter. We wanted to continue to save money each year so that we could fund our bus purchase reserves and our capital reserves. Those are 2 reserves we use periodically to update our fleet and also plan capital improvement over several years, because our campus, with all the facilities, with all the infrastructure, there is constant need for improvement as we look to the future. Finally, we wanted to continue to hire and retain high-quality staff. For staff that are at Mid-Lakes, we wanted to keep them at Mid-Lakes, and we wanted to make this an attractive place for new staff to want to apply and want to work at this district. So these were our goals we discussed back in February, and these were the goals that we shared once again with our Mid-Lakes staff across the district. A very interesting article I found, and this was in our New York State School Boards Association Sense monthly publication. So this came in late March, early April, and this is also on the NYSSBA website on April 3rd, where the comptroller warned of the funding cliff for schools. Mr. Ganster and I, over the first couple of budget presentations, based on the School Superintendents Association, the School Boards Association, he would kind of share with us some of the things he was hearing across the state in terms of state funding, but also fiscal cliffs looming. What was really refreshing is this is the first article written by the state comptroller. So this is about as good of an acknowledgement from the comptroller of the state saying, hey, there could be a serious issue with once the federal funds have gone, there could right now, the comptroller is projecting a $1.7 billion gap. And I'll say that number again, $1.7 billion of a gap in state funding once the federal funds have sunset. So the comptroller is warning schools to really do some future financial planning in order to make sure they're not in a very tough position where they have to either burden the community, like we said, or look to cut positions. So I just think that our discussions have only been further validated as we've undertaken this path of planning for the future and not just thinking about 1 year, but thinking about multiple years down the road. So here's a breakdown of our expenditures. Once again, by law, all our expenditures need to be broken down into 3 different categories: administrative, program, and capital, which is on the left side of the left table. And on the right-hand side, we've got our revenue made up of 4 different areas. The first thing I'd like to do is I'd like to highlight our expenditures. Without reading out each number, just to give you a brief overview, our administrative portion of the budget accounts for about 10% of the overall budget, or roughly $4.4 million. Last year's administrative portion of the budget was 9.99%. So the change you're seeing is about a 0.1% difference from the 22-23 budget to the 23-24 proposed school budget. So administrative went from 9.99 to about 10%. Our programmatic last year was 77.3%. This year it's 75.9%. So in terms of the overall budget, program has gone down about 2%, and capital has actually gone up from 12.7% to 14.1%. I'm just going to very briefly touch on this. A huge issue why capital has increased is something called debt service as a result of our capital projects. So in about 4 slides, you're going to see under capital, a portion of debt service has gone up by nearly $1 million, and that's what accounts for that 14.1% in capital. On the right-hand side, the money we bring in, the revenue. The revenue in terms of state aid, our state aid projections are roughly $27,558,000, or somewhere in the vicinity of upwards of $4 million in state aid that we're receiving year over year. Our real property taxes represent about $15 million, or in this case, about 34.7%. Last year, 37.3%. This year, 34.7%. The 2 areas that have gone down by nearly a full percentage point are reserves and debt service. Once again, going back to those budget goals, we were able to hit the reset button on our reserves. 1 year ago, $1.149 million. This year, $649,575. So what you're noticing is about a $500,000 reduction, which results in about 1%. Finally, the other sources of revenue. Other has gone down by 1.5%. If for folks that were here 1 year ago, if you recall, we had appropriated $125,000 for a backhoe. So this year, you're going to see a reduction of $125,000, which is resulting in, once again, the other portion of the budget going down by about 1%. Last year, it was 2.6%. This year, it's more like 1.8%. So as we get into revenue, when we look at state aid, the state aid is made up of primarily our foundation aid, which this year Mid Lakes has finally got its 100% catch up of foundation aid, but Mid Lakes also saw a significant increase compared to the number that was projected 2 years ago, based on the consumer price index and various other factors and metrics that were taken into account. This money couldn't have come at a better time in terms of us being able to hit the reset button, and also certain needs that we need to address as a district in this year's budget, but also to help with future financial planning. Something else built into state aid of roughly $800,000 to $900,000 is our building aid. You notice a couple minutes ago, I talked about our debt service going up in the area of capital. We're also seeing our building aid going up as a result of our capital construction projects. So our overall state aid picture has gone up by nearly $4.15 million. Under real property taxes, that number of $303,299, that represents our tax levy increase, which once again is about is exactly a 2% tax levy increase. So that's the change year over year that we're noticing. Asking the community, instead of $15,164,938, asking for $15,468,237. The reserves we've already talked about, but once again, to reiterate, we're able to hit the reset button on our use of reserves and have significantly reduced that to using about $649,000 to once again help us where in future years, if we see some really tight state budgets, we can look to tap into these reserves once again to try to offset any burden on the local community. And finally, the number of 125,000 for the backhoe, but we also saw a difference in some of our pilot agreements in the amount of $706. Okay, expenditures. Once again, you're going to see three different slides of expenditures, the first being administrative, the second being program, and the third being capital. I'm just going to talk very briefly about administrative expenditures overall. There were some areas this year that we had to tackle, starting with our central business office. Our central business office is through Wayne Finger Lakes BOCES. We have a treasurer, an accounts payable clerk, a benefit specialist, a payroll specialist, and a senior treasurer that helps support Phelps-Clifton Springs. And as a result of contracting with BOCES, what we've also appreciated is when typically one person resigns, they assign us another person and we don't have to go through sometimes a 60 or a 90-day hiring process. Furthermore, having our central business office through BOCES has also given us the ability to generate BOCES aid year over year. This central business office, as a result of BOCES salaries, has been losing staff hand over fist. And I think they've had to make some aggressive salary adjustments to keep their BOCES staff there, but to also make it attractive to come and work at BOCES. Our budget for the next year has gone up by nearly $45,000 to $50,000 just for our central business office. But once again, if we had to bring those positions in-house, it would cost us in excess. The total amount would be somewhere in the vicinity of $350,000, which would be far more than what BOCES is charging us to have a shared service of a central business office. Another area we saw a significant increase is insurance. I don't know if you folks remember, but back in February, when we talked about our insurance projections, what it cost to insure the district, property and loss replacement to cover our fleet of buses, our insurance bill has gone up by another $35,000 to $40,000. BOCES services across the board for administrative services, but also for programmatic services, we're seeing an increase with BOCES in the vicinity of 4%. The last one of employee benefits in the 100,000. We've talked about healthcare, but healthcare makes up the largest portion of employee benefits. In that is also the employees' retirement system, the teachers' retirement system built in as well. We noticed our employee benefits go up about 12% in healthcare, or specifically $400,000. A year ago, we were at somewhere in the vicinity of $800,000 that healthcare had gone up. This year, as a result of making some decisions to move to consortium healthcare, we were able to significantly reduce that burden. So employee benefits are going to be spread out between administrative, the next slide, program, and finally capital. If you add those three numbers up, you roughly get $393,000, which is roughly that $400,000 amount that administrative is benefits are increasing year over year. Programmatic. The biggest change in programmatic, besides salaries, has been in the area of special education. We've seen an increased number of students being referred to a variety of programs across Wayne Finger Lakes BOCES and some with Monroe One BOCES in the area of special services or special education. And as a result, our budget has to increase nearly about $1.25 million year over year in the area of special education and students with disabilities. We've also requested an addition of 2 positions to this year's budget, one in the area of information technology support technician and a special education teacher. Those salaries are also reflected in programmatic changes. And finally, salaries across the board. When we look at programmatic salaries, they're in the vicinity of I'd say about $13 million. So when we look at a collective bargaining agreement and contractual raises in the vicinity of anywhere between 3.5% to 4%. And right now we have a tentative agreement with the Faculty Association that we're hoping we can vote on over the next board meeting. But once again, those changes in salary are reflected in these programmatic changes. Lastly, employee benefits, 279,000. The last slide had 101,000. This slide has 279,000. That gets us to that 393,000 amount. Last but not least, capital. As we talk about the capital portion of the budget, a handful of slides ago, about 4 slides ago, we said capital had gone up year over year. It went from 12% of the budget to 14% of the budget. The reason capital has increased is, once again, dealing with debt service and bus purchases. The debt service specifically for all the building projects we've taken on over the last couple of years, and the bond anticipation notes that are now bonded, we're seeing debt service go up. But once again, we also saw our fair share of revenue increase in terms of state aid. So that makes up the 3 portions of the expenditure part of the budget: administrative, program, and capital. A quick revisit of our tax levy over the last 10 years. This is just a snapshot of Mid Lakes' tax levy. I'd like to just point out the red lines or the red dots are the tax levy limit. This is how much the school district could levy in taxes and just get a majority vote. But the blue dots or the blue lines show how much the actual tax levy has been year over year. And once again, just making an observation, over the last 10 years, the school district has only 2 years gone out at the levy limit. Every other year, the district has gone out below the levy limit. And this year, just like last year, it's 2% 2 years in a row. That's what we're asking the voters to vote on, a 2% tax levy increase for the 23-24 school year.
And Carl, I'll just chime in here. I think when we look at this graph, our goal year after year is to leave that line as predictable as possible for our taxpaying community, because we know there are going to be years where we're in a bind, and we know there's going to be years where we have some excess. But creating a predictable increase year over year enables us to do business in a smoother fashion. We would use any of the excess in given years to plan for the future. And when we have those lean years, we would dip into that excess. So this is one of our big goals for the budget this year, is to begin to center ourselves around this number year after year.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir.
Yep.
So the total budget for the total proposed budget for the 23-24 school year is in the amount of $44,472,644, which is an increase of about $3.383 million year over year, or 9.44%. A huge reason for this, once again, was special ed, debt service, but also inflation over the last 2 years that has caused significant increases in salaries and staffing across the district. So we're seeing a budget-to-budget increase that is more resembling, I would say, what inflation has done to the economy over the last 2 years. In spite of that, the tax levy increase year over year is a 2% increase from 22-23. That's what we're asking the community to vote on. So across our 7 municipalities, what we can do is we can use last year's overall assessments and something called the equalization rate to try to give a rough idea of what kind of impact folks would have on their school tax bill. So at a 2% increase across the 7 municipalities, for folks for a $100,000 assessed value, folks without a star would estimate about a $53.27 increase year over year. For folks with star, $36.66, or with the enhanced star, $16.62. Once again, that's using numbers from 22-23 and on a $100,000 assessed value across the 7 municipalities. Finally, the 5 propositions this community will be voting on. First being adopting the annual school budget. Secondly, electing 2 members to the Board of Education. Authorizing the purchase of 5 buses in the amount of $824,130 from the bus purchase reserve. I'd just like to reiterate for anybody tuning in and watching the budget hearing tonight, those are currently diesel buses. We've put in a fueling station at our transportation facility, and we are still committed to right now using diesel buses to support our infrastructure. But we will look to making that transition down the road when the time is right, if we need to make that transition to electric buses. The fourth one down, to create a capital reserve with a max allocation of $8 million. This is essentially a savings account. We're asking the community to vote on creating a savings account. It starts at $0 and it can be maxed out at $8 million in the future. And finally, separate propositions for the library, for the Clifton Springs and the Phelps Community Memorial Library in the amount of $90,000 each, or a total of $180,000. Our 2 board seats that will be up for election, the folks that have, in the order the district received their the nominations are Lynn Liebrecht, Heather Rockefeller, Deborah Gallagher, and Jamie McCarrick. If I mispronounce somebody's first or last name, I apologize. I hope I did okay. But that's the order in which we've received the nominations for the board, for the 2 board seats available. And lastly, I'd like to stop and see if any folks have any questions or comments.
I had a quick question for you, Carl. Can you speak to just the updates and kind of what was finalized in the state budget? We were kind of up in the air on a few things.
Right. The state, we were a little nervous as to how things would play out. I think last year we saw a dip of about $50,000. This year, we actually saw a very small increase in terms of our state aid, but nothing significant where it would significantly impact the overall budget. I think we were just pleased on one end if we had received exactly our money, but to see a small increase was a welcome addition. I think the most nerve-wracking part was that the state budget wasn't signed off on till last week. And so it made for some nervous moments as to could things go south in terms of the negotiations, but all signs from the School Board Association, from the Superintendent's Association said it's about housing, it's about bail reform. So school aid was hopefully, was pretty much locked in at that point. So we're very pleased with the numbers we're receiving.
How about the lunches? I don't know if this is the right form for that discussion around that.
So one of the discussions, and we have to talk more about this because there was a huge advocacy for free meals. So they have said that they will offer free meals with strings attached. And so we have to explore something called a CEP, or Community Eligibility Provision, which is based on a percentage of folks in the district or families in the district that qualify for Medicare or SNAP eligible. It's not just based on your free and reduced lunch rate. And so there's some various metrics associated with CEP, and we have to. A year ago, we went down the path of asking ourselves if we qualified for CEP, and we did not. But sometimes you can apply and they'll give you 3 years to prove your qualification, and after that, they'll kick you out. So it's a slippery slope. If you apply, get it, and then once they do a deeper dive, they say, wait a second, you don't qualify. Well, now you've just told people meals are free. So there are some serious strings attached with CEP that we have to take a deeper dive into to see if it's feasible.
And the collective wisdom amongst the superintendents and through the lawyers at NISCUS was that unilateral free meals across the state was just going to be too high of a price tag to get it through the state budget. And there would have been significant give backs in other areas of the state budget. So it wasn't likely to be pushed by the legislators.
Any other questions or comments, folks? Thank you once again.
Thank you, Carl.
Yep.
All right, introduction of the candidates for the Board of Education. So I just call them up in order.
Yeah.
Right. Lynn, if you want to come on up. Welcome.
Well, thank you. Good evening. I am Lynn Liebrecht. So I guess a little bit about me, right? Okay. So I am a licensed clinical social worker and credentialed alcoholism and substance abuse counselor. I currently work at Ontario County Mental Health, doing clinician work, so treating individuals with those disorders, as well as supervising. So I am responsible for program development, community outreach. I sit on some committees in regards to community safety and things of that nature. So I am also a Mid-Lakes grad. So Mid-Lakes holds a special place in my heart. I have 2 kids in the district. My son is in 10th grade. My daughter is in kindergarten. So very much invested in just supporting the district however I can, utilizing my experience that I have through work in my degrees to kind of just support and assist with social emotional needs. I'm a big advocate. Safety is very important to me, especially in this day and age in our district. So anything that I can do to assist in that, in those matters, I'm happy to do so. All right. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I'm Heather Rockefeller. I know many of you. I have worked for over 20 years with a private medical office, and I've pretty much run the show, did all the budgeting, marketing, have a lot of financial experience. So this is a good meeting for me. And on the side, I've always taught at FLCC as well. And just about 4 years ago, I started teaching at Waterloo High School, and I teach the Gemini business classes and economics. So very interested in the education side of things. I've been to their board meetings as well. So a lot of this is familiar. My son is a senior here. He'll be leaving you guys in a couple months. But I also have my niece that is in 8th grade who lives with me. So I've been a lifelong community member here at Mid-Lakes as well. Graduated with Tracy a while back. But yeah, very invested in the community. We see it growing all around us. So that starts right here with the school district to keep attracting that kind of, you know, success in the community. So that's it.
Thank you. Did you get a letter from Deb at all? No. Okay. All right. I think that's it then, right? Yeah. All right. Can I get a motion? Do I need a motion to adjourn? Or do I just adjourn? You just adjourn. I would like to adjourn the public hearing. Adjourned.